The blue implies an atmosphere on Titan. In fact, it's true that back in 1948 we knew Titan had an atmosphere. It's the only moon with an appreciable atmosphere. You'll see ice on the surface, which is good. You'll see rock, which is bad. Any rock on Titan is at the core. Again, the rock at the surface is ice. But this is believed to be the first ever depiction of one celestial object from another celestial object, neither of which is Earth. Well, that's Titan, seen by the Cassini spacecraft, and until Cassini got to Saturn, we didn't know what the surface was like. We couldn't see through that thick veil. There's a photochemical haze in the atmosphere. It makes it look orange. But Cassini had special instrumentation that allowed us to see through the veil so we could actually see the surface below. And it turns out there are liquid lakes there, but since it's so cold, the lakes aren't water. They are ethane and methane, liquid natural gas. And so therefore, season 1, we had, like I said, two episodes that centered around a Titan-like moon around a Saturn-like planet. And it turns out that this is Bradley Thompson, and he comes up a lot, by the way, because Bradley and David Weddle, his writing partner, they wrote some of the more tech-heavy episodes. In fact, with one exception, if they did an episode, I probably did a lot of work on it, the exception being downloaded, which I did nothing on because they just didn't need it. That was a character story. But their episodes are more tech-heavy. They did the Exodus Part 1 and 2, so the belly flop or the Adama maneuver, as it's called. They did, again, generally more tech-heavy episodes. And Bradley was the one, the tech person, and David is more of the character person. So Bradley had been following the Cassini mission. And not only that, the thing that got him interested in writing science fiction, and that's Bradley and myself in a Raptor up in Vancouver. But one thing that got him interested in science fiction was a book by Robert Heinlein called Farmers in the Sky. And that takes place on Ganymede, which is one of these icy moons orbiting Jupiter. So therefore, they just jumped at the opportunity of setting a story on Titan. So even though I got a lot of input in that story, it wasn't because it wasn't my idea. It was just coincidental that they had already been following Cassini, and somebody from Cassini happens to get a job on that show. But one thing I suggested that I had to see the episode 4 or 5 times before I noticed it, because there's something that I suggested they did, and I thought I missed it. I didn't see it for like several times. Is in Titan with that hydrocarbon atmosphere, that haze. I figured that if Vipers are operating in that, the thruster bells are going to be hot, and it's going to turn into a thick, gooey mush. And there was a scene where they talk about the chief. He puts just a finger on the thruster bell and scoops out and just flicks it out on the flight deck. And I just said, oh, they missed it. Well, I didn't. I missed the fact that he walks past a Viper and looks down and goes, and then keeps on walking. But he doesn't. So that was what that was about. Well, season 1, obviously, I mentioned Bradley and David also wrote Hand of God, where they attacked the Cylon fuel depot. It's another episode where there's a lot of science that got involved. But and in season 1, certain perks involved with the job. We had to go to the set a few times and hang out. Lots of awards, yes. Actually, Aaron Douglas in my office at JPL. But then, I understand now why, generally actors are very insecure people. Now I know why. Because at the end of the season, you get all these accolades, it's a great experience, and then you wait, and you wait, and you wait, and I wasn't hearing. I heard Black was greenlit for season 2, and they're not calling me, and I'm not hearing anything, and I'm not hearing anything. I go, oh my God, they don't like me. Well, I screwed up. They're holding that water thing against me, aren't they? I know it. And I think you get really paranoid. They hate me. I know, they always wanted to hire Andre. They always liked him best. It's another science advisor, they were going to Star Trek. And then I got the call. This took a while, but Bradley and David wrote the first 2 episodes of season 4. And I get a call, and Bradley says, what we need for you to do is figure out how do we get in this situation, and how the hell do we get out? Remember, we're Scattered, the first episode of season 2, Scattered in Valley of Darkness, both by Bradley and David. And this is where Cassini does have a reference. The Cassini spacecraft, this is the nominal mission tour. These pedals are orbiting around Saturn. Saturn's at the center of this. These units are in Saturn radii. And the different colors refer to different parts of the mission. This is the extended mission. So this is the orbits of Cassini around Saturn. And this is the x-axis is where the sun is, pointing the sun into these. And occasionally when we take a an image, or want to take an image of an object in a poorly defined or chaotic orbit, we update a position, the best known position, right before the spacecraft takes its image, as opposed to weeks in advance as is usual, simply because if you don't do that, you end up with a blank picture. So things like, this is Phoebe. This is, you know, likely now unemployed friend. And so for these objects, if you, sometimes in these objects, if you don't update a position at the last minute and rely on an older position, this is what you get in your field of view. It didn't happen very many times, but it has happened to us. So I thought that could be appropriate in an episode where, remember we're at Cobalt, this is scattered. We're at Cobalt, Adama takes 2 in the chest, and an emergency situation, Galactica jumps one place, Fleet jumps someplace else. And the thinking was, what if they're constantly updating our emergency jump coordinates and they forget to do the last update? It's like, that's based on something we do on Cassini. And then Galactica has to jump back. This is always part of the situation. We want to get to a situation where Galactica jumps one place, Fleet jumps someplace else, and to get to the Fleet, we have to go back to where we started, do some calculations, and then find the Fleet. That was the parameters that I was given. So that's how we came up with the idea of the Cassini-like updating the positions, and instead of a position in the sky of a moon, it's the position where we're going to jump to in case we get attacked. Of course, Galactica jumps, happy ending. That was actually a fairly challenging one. That took some thought. But in the beginning of season 3, let's quickly stepping through the seasons. Beginning of season 3, again, Bradley contacts me and says, okay, we're going to start getting serious about finding Earth. What we need for you to do is talk to us about different astronomical signs, portents, landmarks, things that exist in space that we can make references to in lore, in writings of Pythia, in visions, which is what we did. One thing that I noticed, I thought was a huge revelation, and people didn't seem to latch onto this, which I thought was really cool, is that what we find out, you know, the president was following the writings of Pythia, right? And in season 3, what we find out is that Pythia's writings weren't entirely prophetic. She was on the trip to Earth. Remember we find that out? What does that imply? She's a Cylon. We are following the writings of the Cylon. If she went to Earth, she's a Cylon. So that didn't really come out explicitly. But I go, that's, how cool is that? We're following the religious writings of a Cylon. There were a lot of things we did like that were implied. In fact, let me go back to season 2 for a second. We talk about this in the book. If you're paying really close attention, and let me qualify that, if you're paying anally close attention to the show, in season 2, remember in the episode of Epiphanies, remember that Hera, they type her blood, and they say Hera has no blood type. If you were really anal, and if you really were following that logical conclusion, you could have guessed back then that we, humans on this planet, are a blend of human and Cylon. Because what that meant is if they were used to, if they saw somebody who didn't have a blood type, what that means is that they have A, B, maybe AB blood types, they don't have O. That's what no blood type is, it's O. That's the most common blood type in our planet, among humans, what we call humans. We'll call us humans and them colonials, for completion. So Hera was a blood type you find in, obviously, Cylons, and find in us, and don't find in the colonials. That was the first scientific hint that we are a mix of Cylons and colonials. Back in season 2. So kind of cool. Flew under the radar and kind of intentionally, but that was kind of a cool little scientific tidbit. But in season 3, you'll see there are a lot of astronomical portents. And this is actually a slide from a PowerPoint I did for the writers, where I said our galaxy has all sorts of things: nebulae, spiral arms, multiple star systems, star clusters, variable stars, black holes, all sorts of things. And what can we use as signs of portents? Well, pulsars. Pulsar is a type of neutron star where you have a magnetic field and it's called a polar jet. But the dipole, or the spin axis, is different than the jet, so it traces a cone in the sky, and if you're on that cone, you get a pulse, 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 pulse as it spins. That's how a pulsar works. So we thought, oh, how about binary pulsars? Because we found those exist. And so there was an episode, there was a pair of binary pulsars, which were the eye of the lion, in the Lion's Head Nebula. And we also had clusters, star clusters, which became a globular cluster, and I pointed out that this is a fortuitous side effect. We finally have a way to use the word cluster frac, which actually didn't get an episode until season 4, by the way. Celix said it on Demetrius, in case you're interested where that finally gets spoken. But we have clusters, old clusters and new clusters, and those are actually somewhat different. Clusters are groups of stars. There's two kinds. There's open clusters, which are groups of hundreds, maybe thousands of stars, sort of weakly gravitationally bound. You have globular clusters, which are collections of millions or even billions of stars, billions and billions of stars, which we actually had to traverse the episode passage where Luciana dies. What was I going to say? Oh, yeah. Interestingly enough, around that time that we're doing this, the Huygens probe, which Cassini carried to Saturn, had parachuted through the atmosphere of Titan, and the prospect of life on Titan was kind of forefront. And we looked at this. When we actually, interestingly enough, on Titan, we were getting a lot of data from Cassini flybys and from Huygens. This here is an image of what we think is a volcanic plume on Titan, an eruption. So if the rocks are on Titan are ice surface, and if volcano spews molten rock, what does a volcano on Titan spew? Water. So it turns out that a magma chamber on Titan could be a cauldron of liquid water and a place where we can have life. The kind of going assumption that people look for life is that any place you have liquid water is a chance for life. So a magma chamber on Titan could be a cauldron where life that supports life. So, same time, I pointed out to these guys that we tend to think of as any type of star being able to support life.